Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the first DOLC on air for DOLC 2024. Days of Law Career, also known as DOLC, is an annual event organized by the Career Development Department of Badan Eksekutif Mahasiswa, Fakultas Hukum Universitas Indonesia. But you might know DOLC as the biggest law job fair in Indonesia. Indeed, DOLC seeks to meet your needs as law students and law graduates with important information on job prospects, internships, and further educational opportunities. Keeping in this pursuit of objective, DOLC also organizes events such as talk shows, workshops, and classes. One of them is DOLC On Air, a podcast which provides students with insights on the professional world awaiting them after their studies. This allows you to project your own career. Today we'll be talking about then and now, from a fresh graduate to a legal practitioner. My name is Trisha David, and I will be moderating your podcast today. Before we start, I would like to introduce our speaker for today on DOLC On Air. Abang Abdurrahman Al-Fatih, or Bang Abdur, is a diplomat attaché at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia. He specializes in legal affairs and international treaties. Previously, he has also had a background in general corporate and mergers acquisition, as well as dispute resolution and real estate that he gained during his tenure as an associate in Assagaf Hamzah and Partners. Now he brings a multifaceted skill to his diplomatic role. His academic journey started with a bachelor's degree and a master's degree from the University of Indonesia, the Faculty of Law. As a testament to his legal excellence, his numerous accolades during his study, including winning the Foreign Policy Paper Competition and securing the Best Position Paper at the ASEAN Foundation Model ASEAN Meeting. His academic prowess is further recognized as he is the first runner-up of FHUI's Dean's Honors List for most outstanding students. In one of his most notable achievements, Bang Abdur received a gold medal in the International Mediation Singapore competition held at NUS Law, Singapore. All of these accomplishments goes to showcase Bang Abdurrahman's rich background in law, diplomacy, and his academic excellence. Now, without further ado, let's welcome our speaker. Hello, Bang Abdur. How are you doing, Bang?
Hello, Trisha. Thank you. I'm doing great, and I'm happy to be here. First of all, thank you for everyone who have invited me. And let's get to the questions.
Right. We're very happy to have you here. And, just a quick note before we start, I think there's a lot to unpack here. Your experience in law is not only extensive, but it's also varied. You've been an associate, you've been a lawyer, and now you're a diplomat, and you've had these competitions that you joined, whether it be writing or mediating. I think there's a lot that we can talk about here, and maybe the question that our students are going to be asking is, how did you start? When you were at their position in FHUI, what sort of specialization did you took?
Okay, thank you, Trisha, for the question. Every time I receive the question of what specialization I took during law school, everyone would have thought it's going to be either international law, private international law, or maybe at least business law. But I'm neither of these majors. I specialize in administrative law, but during my time there was a sub-specialization under administrative law. It was environmental law, and at the time environmental law was not that much interesting, especially to FHUI students. So when I decided to take it, I also questioned whether this specific particular specialization would benefit me in the long run, especially when I decided to become a lawyer in a corporate law firm who is very, very interested to first graduates if they have business law backgrounds or international law backgrounds, specifically in transnational business. So I didn't took any of this specialization, but I realized that the requirement when you wanted to apply in a law firm it only required you to have a Bachelor of Laws degree, not a Bachelor of International Law degree, not a Bachelor of Business Law degree. So I just decided to apply, and I got accepted in a law firm, and I decided to be in that law firm for 10 months, and then there was an opening, right, for the selection of diplomat, and then I kind of have this manifestation and also reflection. Do I really want to be in a law firm in the long run, or do I want to be here in law firm just to get the knowledge? Because people want to get to a law firm in a long run. They see themselves being a partner, for example, or at least a senior associate. But I don't see that in me. So I started to question myself. Okay, I had an environmental law qualification. I decided to apply as a diplomat, especially in an era where the term climate change has now turned into climate crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And the forefront, the one who will be guiding our country's interests at the forefront, at the first line, are going to be our diplomats. And it turns out that this is a profession that is not only secured by international relations students. I thought at first it was secured particularly for those taking international relations major. I happen to be one of those people who wanted to take international relations but didn't get the opportunity because I was from a natural science major.
Mm-hmm.
As we know, law school, FOE in particular, in my batch, we had around 450 students. So it was one of the biggest opportunities you can take. The bigger percentage that you can take is that if you take the law major compared to international relations, especially if you are a natural science student during your high school. So I took the chance, participated in a law firm only for 10 months before I am now hitting almost my second year being a diplomat. So those, I would say, are the specializations with a plural that I took, that I finally now had in my capacity as a diplomat.
So you mentioned that you wanted to join the international relations program perhaps before you became a law student. And do you think this contributed to the fact that, and maybe the fact that you knew you wanted to work in a government institution and even more so at being a diplomat, do you think that contributed to you actually picking environmental law as your chosen specialization during your studies?
I would say I didn't know that there are a lot of international aspects in environmental law. So in FOE, during my time in law school, environmental law is a specific subject understood from a national perspective, the national regime of our legal laws and regulation. But turns out that there are a lot of environmental principles that are referenced from international sources. We're talking about international sources of international law. We're talking about the subjects of international that are contributing to the norm settings of environmental law. So the spark, yes, I would say international relations sparked the interest, but being a law student, a law graduate, I would say that would be the most contributing factor in me deciding to take diplomacy as I would say, a journey that I would have until my retirement, I would say.
Great. And so maybe we can jump into the topic of
Yes.
being a diplomat, right?
Yes.
So what sort of preparation did you first, took and prepared before you actually applied to become a diplomat? I mean, we know that you were an associate in a law firm for 10 months before, but after that time, how was your transition? What was the things that you prepared?
Okay, so perhaps nobody really knows about this, but the profession of a diplomat is a profession under the civil servant regime. So many people, so many of my friends did not know that diplomat is equivalent to PNS. Nobody realizes that, myself included, until I would say the end of my law school journey. So when I realized that it is a civil servant job, I needed to realize that there are several regulations regulating the job of a diplomat from a national perspective. But the profession of a diplomat is very unique because we're not talking about a job that existed 50, 100 years ago. this is a job that has been in existence since thousands of years ago. We're talking about the kingdoms of, let's say, the Roman empires, the Greek empires. They have this idea of sending their representatives to a far away lands, far away areas, knowing that there were no internet back then, right? They wanted to make sure that whatever is happening in that faraway area can be sent back to their home country. And there's a term diplomat for that. It develops, it is now becoming a profession that is regulated internationally so that a diplomat can have privileges, immunities, all of these special rights that other civil servant jobs do not have. So back to your question, Trisha, about being a diplomat, the selection. First, I needed to realize that I'm no longer working in a law firm. So I will not be able to only focus on searching what articles, what paragraphs do I need to find in order to find a basis that is going to be fulfilling for my seniors in researching something, for example. But I'm talking about a world where law is only one part of it. We're talking about politics, international relations, economics. We're talking about culture, history. All of these combined, it makes the world of diplomacy is very dynamic, and you could not just say you're wrong, you're right, you're 100% wrong, you're 100% right. There's a situation where, all right, I'm only 75% right, but the rest 25%, this is my argument, this is my argument. It's a different world with law firm, where I remember that my senior associates, even the partners in the firm, told me, okay, Abdur, you needed to find an explicit article saying that this is wrong, this is allowed, this is not allowed. That's the world. But in diplomacy, the sayings kind of go like this. Okay, Abdur, we understand that this is a situation, but we also have the situation. We have the situation. Let's say we don't have a basis anymore. How would you make sure that our action or our policy is considered legal from a law perspective, but also just from a justice perspective, political perspective, economic perspective? So I think that is one thing that everyone who wishes to be a diplomat should prepare for, and not only from a pragmatic perspective, that is, exercising, questions in Japanese selection and all that. But apart from that, you need to understand the kind of area that you're entering into, because it is a world where you're no longer going to be enforced or required to be only from a law perspective. I think that will be the best preparation that you needed to have if we are opening or recruiting next year, because this year we're not recruiting.
That's very interesting. So it's not only something technical that you need to prepare, but it's also the shift of perspective and changing how you look at your work and the world. And yeah, I think you also touched upon a little bit about the scope of the work of being a diplomat, right? And maybe I don't know, did you know what you were getting yourself into? This shift of perspective is...
I'll say I only knew like 5%, the rest 95%, I just found it just recently.
Right. During those process, did you think that you went through something that you didn't expect? Something that was not even the littlest bit expected for you? And could you perhaps explain a little bit about that?
Yes. Okay. So the profession of a diplomat requires not only for you to have a substantial knowledge regarding the world of diplomacy and international law, but also the non-professional preparation that you needed to be ready for. For example, the fact that we are going to be rotated every 4 years in our embassies everywhere in the world. And this requires you to think whether or not you want to bring your family, whether or not you want to marry earlier, stuff like that. So these non-professional aspects determine the professional aspects that you wish to prepare for. If you only focus on, let's say you only want to focus on the area of law, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Indonesia Ministry, we have a specific unit, which is the unit that I'm currently in, specializing in international law and legal affairs. You can be a diplomat specializing in that particular one area for the rest of your life, and that would also secure a position, for example, in a senior position, high official position. But you could also be a diplomat with a law background, but you're trying to entertain yourself with the areas of multilateral diplomacy, bilateral diplomacy, or even you want to focus on consular relations. We're talking about the areas of ceremonial proceedings whenever we have high officials coming in Indonesia, or if you want to prepare a secret meeting between ambassadors, for example. Those are the areas where law is not a central part, but it still plays a part in which that we law students are going to be really benefited. So I would say those are the non-expected aspects, but those are the only expected non-expected aspects. There's still a lot of non-expected aspects out there that I'm still trying to discover, and perhaps we're going to have a second volume of DOLC on air to talk about that.
So I think that's also very interesting. The non-professional aspects of your life then now determines the professional journey that you might have in the future. I think, that's not an easy choice, obviously. But for young diplomats like yourself, how do you see yourself solving this question?
Okay, so as a young diplomat, you have the advantage of the early preparation where the mid or senior diplomats do not have. You have all the resources. You're living in a generation where internet is very accessible, where everything is just in one touch away, one screen away. So those are the opportunities where you can grasp, but also you have to make sure that you capitalize on all the opportunities that can benefit you, but also benefit you in the long run, something that you in the present self right now would not be able to consider in an early age. So for example, let's say this is 2023. We never know what will happen in 2045. We would not even know whether or not all the islands in the world will be intact, right? So you have to think about that. Or you have to think about the fact that we are relocating our capital city. You have to think of the fact that we're no longer entering a unipolar world. You have to be able to consider the fact that investment is now a very attractive aspect in our business world, so that you need to consider how would you as a diplomat position yourself as the defender of the interests of your country, but at the same time you need to realize that there are investment opportunities that could help the people of Indonesia. So those are something that law firms can help in the aspect of guarding the law aspects, right? The legal regulations, but diplomats help in terms of whether or not negotiations are doable, whether or not negotiations are making an effort to make sure that in the long run, in the future, in 20, 30, 45 years, we are able to secure our national interests without compromising the interests of so many people that are interested in the stakeholder position of Indonesia, not only as a country, but also perhaps one of the world major powers, let's say 20 or 30, 40 years.
Right. So I think we've talked a little bit about the interests that, the shift of interest when you're just working in a law firm, the very singular looking, seemingly objective, and also then switching to diplomacy. And now you have to take into account a lot of things. But then I'm wondering, what does that actually look like on a day-to-day basis? What does being a diplomat actually entails in that sort of circumstance? So.
All right. So in a day-to-day basis, you're gonna have to keep up with all the news that are out there, all the news that are in their primary forms, but also all the news that are translated into our Indonesians' perspective. Something that a diplomat might need to take time in terms of learning bit by bit. But in a day-to-day basis, I would say you're gonna have to ask your seniors, your senior diplomats, even let's say the ambassador level positions. You have to know exactly what their view is on the current issues. But as a junior, you also have to be very, very open to the fact that you don't know everything as a junior diplomat. same goes with the world of law firm, for example. As a junior associate, you don't know everything in terms of the scope of, let's say, a contract, for example. For a diplomat's case, you don't know exactly the scope of whether or not what we're trying to do or to make a policy about is going to affect so many people or so many subjects of international law or foreign policy. So I would say, in a daily basis, a diplomat has to read a lot, write a lot, ask a lot, and this might apply for every job. Yes, I would say I will agree. But what makes it different is that you don't know everything,
Yeah.
and you may not be able to know everything as well. So you have to be in this gray area where you have to satisfy as many people as possible, but also at the same time you have to satisfy exactly what the government or the country of Indonesia wants in the future.
That's, I think that is a very good image of what being a diplomat actually entails, so the students can actually understand. And if they want to prepare, perhaps I want to be a diplomat someday, which I know a lot of our FHU students starting to pick up that interest. I think they can totally take that advice by reading a lot and asking a lot. And even if you don't want to be a diplomat, as you said yourself, that is a very great tip in honing your skills as a law student. But in terms of the kind of projects that you've handled, that you've been handed, what are the interesting projects or maybe share-worthy projects that you've handled them?
Okay, thank you, Trisha. I just realized that in law firms, there's this term called confidentiality, where you don't share your client's work, you don't share what's going on in your law firm. But the world of foreign policy, the world of diplomacy, you could see exactly what we're working on television on a daily basis, right? What's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in China, what's happening in Indo-Pacific, what's happening in so many areas of the world. Those are the jobs of us diplomats. You could exactly see what our foreign policy is by the speeches of our foreign minister, the speeches of our president, the speeches of the senior ministers representing Indonesia in so many international forums. Those are the works of diplomats. But from a perspective of a diplomat in a junior level, what you have to work on is to construct the basis from the very bottom of this very tall building called diplomacy, right? But you also need to understand that when you're entering into that specific matter, you have to realize that what you're drafting here is going to be sent into this very tall building called diplomacy to a foreign minister level, to an ambassador level, right? So whenever I was given a task to revise our current international treaties law number 24 of 2000. It is a job ongoing, but I realized that this is going to affect so many aspects of our life, from investment, from economy, from tourism, from environmental perspectives. Everything that you didn't know would be the job of a diplomat turns out to be the job of a diplomat. Something that you learn in first semester, second semester, third semester of law school. All those subjects in law school you didn't know would be beneficial, right? Like, let's say, and with all the respect, adat law, for example, right? The law on traditional values, traditional communities in Indonesia. It is also a job of a diplomat to discuss those aspects from, let's say, a human rights perspective, right? The subject on, let's say, procedural law, hukum acara, let's say. Why would a diplomat read KUHAP, right? Our criminal procedural law. Why would a diplomat read that? Turns out, just last week, I was given a task to understand and read our criminal procedural law that actually relates to the day-to-day operations of our embassies abroad. So whenever we want or we have a proceeding here in our national court jurisdiction, and then you want to summon a witness, an Indonesian witness, currently abroad, let's say in Malaysia, for example, in Kuala Lumpur, if you want to have an electronic court proceeding, the world of foreign policy would step in because you're going to have to ask for the permission not only from our embassy in Kuala Lumpur, but also to the government of the Federation of Malaysia whenever there is something that is too sensitive to talk about in that particular proceeding, for example. So those are the non-expected aspects, right, on a day-to-day basis. And I would say that actually forces us to really open this big closed box so that we would be open to so many subjects of not only law but also other disciplines such as economics or international relations, for example. So I would say that would be the answer.
That is very interesting, and you covered a lot of things there, even mentioning, the fact that the subjects that we learn in law school turns out to be very much
Yes.
relevant to your job now. And I find that very interesting. And maybe to brush upon the previous topic of the specialization that you took as a law student, would you recommend other young diplomats or legal law students to take environmental law, or do you think, such as yourself right now, you're focusing on international treaties, do you think they would be better prepared taking international public law, or maybe because it's all relevant, you can take anything and it's still great and beneficial for you?
Okay, thank you, Trisha. Very interesting question. Personally, I would really recommend taking environmental law because we really need that. But again, from an administrative argument, there's no need for you to take a particular specialization because that wouldn't be the contributing factor if you want to become a diplomat. In my batch, let's say, we have myself, environmental law, we have a private international law graduate, business law graduate, even health law. Because we also have that in our batch. So to say that a specific specialization will play a part in whether or not you get accepted, I would say no. But of course, taking public international law or private international law will definitely help you to grasp the understanding of a diplomat, because we're talking so many international law rules here whenever you become a participant in foreign policy. So I would suggest for you to take whatever specialization that you want, but make sure you're the best at it, that you're very good at it. But if you want to play safe, and this is from someone who is currently working, taking international law would definitely help, because I needed to rehearse again the basics of international law when I first entered. So if you already have a solid understanding of that international law perspective, I think that will help you. But of course, again, that does not mean the fact that you will be closed from the world of diplomacy if you take specialization other than in public international law. I wouldn't say that will be the case.
Okay, that's a great answer, actually. Okay, so you've mentioned a lot of things, and to me, it seems like you're a very adaptive kind of person. So that's why you've been transitioning very smoothly to your career. But I think this brings a question: what is the key skill that young diplomats must have when entering this career field?
Okay, good question. So, in order for you to be able to be an adaptive diplomat, or a person who is very meticulous in transitioning in so many ways, I would say I highly recommend for you to understand the basic legal understanding of the law itself, but also foreign policy. Because I see some people that they cannot differentiate a regulation and a decree. They cannot differentiate whether this is the duty and responsibility of the central government or the regional government. They cannot differentiate whether or not this is a right or this is an obligation. They don't have the resources to discover whether or not this specific issue is the job of a diplomat or the job of other ministries, for example. So having those very basic understandings of how you differentiate stuff. That would help you in the long run, especially in the world of diplomacy where everything is dynamic, everything is not static, everything is moving in such an accelerated way. I would say if you don't understand the basics, then that's endgame. I would say you have to understand all the 101s that you have in law school, all the pengantars in law school, all the asas-asas in law school. I would say it's very, very important. I might not know everything about procedural law, but I do know the principles of non-retroactivity, the fact that you cannot deem someone as wrongful until they are proven as such. All the principles of those areas that would benefit you in understanding all the principles in diplomacy. Where if we're talking about diplomacy, not all the principles are codified, right? All the principles are just references, but you have the main references, you have the main references but not so followed by so many countries, or the mini references, the sub major references that turns out to be developing in a way that now countries are turning into those references. A lot of things that we don't have a strong legal basis, but we have to understand whether or not that those principles should have a legal basis. So all the basics, I would say.
Right. So I think you recommend being critical, and in being critical, you must have a very strong foundational understanding of your field. That is. Okay, so maybe as our last question, we're going to be going over certain statements or question, and you're going to be telling us briefly if it's a myth or a fact. Okay, so is the ability to speak English the most important aspect in being a diplomat?
It's a good question. But I would say a fact. Because we're speaking English in the international level. So those are the most important facts, if not one of many important facts in the world of diplomacy.
Okay, next, does being a diplomat means you visit abroad countries often?
I would say yes, especially even in a junior level. This will be the time where you need to prepare for visiting so many countries.
That's very interesting. I think that's going to gain a lot of interest from the students. Okay, next. Do diplomats study about tourism and foreign culture?
Yes, of course. Even in our embassies, we have a specific unit handling the promotion of Indonesian culture abroad, even in areas where we don't have so many Indonesian citizens. So it's a fact.
Right. Then, does diplomats often need to negotiate or interpret complex international agreements and treaties?
Always myth, if we use the term always, but once you hit the middle level of being a diplomat or even a senior level, those will be the times where negotiations are a crucial part of diplomacy, so that you will be involved in so many opportunities in the world of negotiation. So always, I would say myth, because we have specific diplomats that are not tasked with those duties of negotiation.
Great. And then would you say that law graduates has a very good chance at excelling in this job, maybe in comparison to international relations graduates?
Okay. I would say a fact. That's a super fact. Because the law major is now becoming, I would say, a dominant component of diplomacy. You cannot have a diplomacy without an explicit law graduates stating whether or not this is true, this is not allowed, this is allowed, and stuff like that. So I would say super fact.
Great answer. Great answer. So we are now reaching the end of our DOLC on air. But before we say goodbye to the audience, I would like to ask Bang Abdur to give some advice to the audience to, maybe they want to pursue the same career path as now you are pursuing. And to Bang Abdur, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I want to tell everyone who is now watching this DOLC on air that diplomats and the world of diplomacy are now becoming very relevant. You see so many world events that are now accessible on the internet. people who are not even interested in foreign policy issues, international issues, they are now realizing that we have to understand the basics of all of these issues, right? Especially in a world where we are having a hard time to differentiate whether these are facts, whether these are myths, whether these are hoaxes. You have to realize that this is no longer a world where you cannot relate to, especially if you're a law background, if you're a law student. This is a world where we're gonna need your help, right? These law students who are watching, law graduates who are watching, we're gonna need the help of so many legal scholars, and the law background is becoming a very dominant part of diplomacy. Many of our foreign ministers are law graduates, and many of them as well are FHOE graduates. So I would say, and this is not an endorsement, but I would say if you're interested in the world of diplomacy, do realize that this is a world where the law background is crucially needed. So start preparing to get exposed to international issues, international comprehension of foreign policy and diplomacy, and try to be adaptive and flexible towards other disciplines such as politics, economics, cultural studies, literature studies, communication studies, because all of these disciplines are supporting your main understanding of the world of both foreign policy and also diplomacy. If you have any questions, just reach me out, ask the committee for my contact. And thank you for the DOLC on air, and I hope that I can introduce better about the world of diplomacy.
Thank you, Abang Abdur. That's a very great advice, and also an invitation for the students to actually pursue this. And to end this episode of DOLC on Air, I would like to briefly recap what we have been conversing in the past 30 minutes or so. So, first of all, Abang Abdur has shed a light on his transition in working in a law firm to working in the realm of diplomacy. And he emphasized in the shift towards a more argumentative nature in his current profession. He addresses various perspectives, such as the political, economic, and even cultural angles of this job. He's highlighted a plethora of cases where diplomats encounter in their line of work. Abang Abdur has underscores the multifaceted role of a diplomat. He has delved into how your individual choices will profoundly affect your professional life, between dedicating your time to family and even timing your personal life and personal choices. These things might affect your professional life in such a way that it might be a problem for young diplomats to face. Moreover, Abang Abdur emphasizes on the evolving landscape of diplomacy. He has emphasized the needs of diplomats to consider their position in helping people both in Indonesia and in the country of their assignment. He has elaborated on the continuous learning process diplomats undergo, particularly through the translation of news into Indonesian, extensive reading, writing, and research efforts. Now we are concluding the podcast by touching upon the intriguing yet confidential projects within law firms and the comparison from this to the importance of understanding diplomatic impacts that we can look up basically everywhere. It's broadcasted in television, other news medias, and even social media. Now we emphasize on the responsibility that comes with the drafting at the embassy level. So, massive appreciation to you, Abang Abdur, as our speaker today, for taking your time and sharing your experience and advice for us and enlightening us with your diplomatic insights on DOLC on Air, titled Then and Now, From a Fresh Graduate to a Legal Practitioner. I know that the audience will get lots of fruitful insights because I definitely got a lot here. So stay tuned on our social media for more contents like this. Thank you so much, and we hope everybody has a great day. Wassalamualaikum, Shalom, Om Shanti Shanti Om, Namo Buddhaya, and peace upon us all.